Coming up, the new era for the New York Football Giants begins in earnest on Sunday following the release of Daniel Jones, the naming of Tommy DeVito as the starter against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Where do we stand as Big Blue tries to navigate through the remainder of this season? The state of Joe Schoen, the status of Brian Daboll feels like now more than ever the team is in a state of chaos. We dive into it all, though, coming up next. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that I am your host, Adam Armbrecht. Of course, coming in after, listen, full disclosure, a total week off and away from the podcast with big breaking news, right? Things obviously unfolded in a way for the Giants over the last week and a half or so in terms that I think even for the most diehard of Daniel Jones supporters, for the most diehard of Daniel Jones detractors, was surprising. Because the New York Football Giants have struggled to do things, I don't even want to say the right way, but just in a way that communicates to the fan base, we have a direction, we have a plan, and we have the steps that we're going to take in order to get there. Instead, it feels a little bit like Keystone Cops. And we're going to talk about what it means for Tommy DeVito here over the remainder of this season, what happened, obviously, with Drew Lock as well in that decision-making process. But we start with Daniel Jones, and I understand we're a few days behind this, but it does bear discussion because now you have the Minnesota Vikings as being one of the top potential landing spots for Daniel Jones. You have the reports that following his release, Daniel Jones wants to go to a playoff contending team, one where if the starting quarterback were to go down, he'd have an opportunity to showcase what he's capable of doing. And listen, no one's going to sit here, especially on OGP, and talk about Daniel Jones in a way of, hey, he didn't get a fair shake when it comes to the New York Giants and the way that it was structured and offensive line play and coaching turnover and all those things. No, the play on the field is the play on the field. Absolutely zero issue with moving on from Daniel Jones. But as we know, when you go from Daniel Jones as the starting quarterback and there's some speculation about him potentially being benched to Daniel Jones is going to be benched, and then we'll get into the naming of Tommy DeVito as the starter over Drew Lock. To have it then unravel over the next handful of days where is he going to be? Is he going to be the backup quarterback? Well, no, of course not. You're worried about the injury there, obviously. You don't want to be in a position where he could have to step in and play. So you keep bumping him down the chain of command. You have him out there playing, scout team safety briefly on a high level. The New York Football Giants, because the money was going to be equal whether you did it now or you did it in the off season in terms of the $23+ million that you're going to have locked into him, and then the option between pushing it across the next two seasons versus taking it all in one lump sum. The right way to do it, be benching Daniel Jones, and also having internal discussions about what we want to do next. At which point you go to Daniel Jones and whether you want to do right by him or not, which oftentimes I do think comes down from John Mara, right? He wants to do right by players on an individual level. I think 100%, even though Daniel Jones is not even a whiff of what Eli Manning was to this franchise, I think that still resonates for John Mara, doing things right, doing things the right way, communicating the right way with players. I think that you could have easily said, we're going to bench Daniel Jones and have an internal discussion, and then come out the next day and said, hey, we're going to go ahead and give Daniel Jones his release because, cliche terms, we want to give him the best opportunity, but also because we are moving forward into a new era for the New York Football Giants. And while we're disappointed things didn't work out with Daniel, we want to make sure that our focus organizationally at every single level is about the future and what we want to accomplish. And then you give Daniel Jones his fond farewell. Instead, the clunkiness of Daniel Jones wants to come out and take responsibility, which he has ownership in, of not performing to the level that he needed to, not getting more wins for this team, right? And being grateful for the opportunity. We know that at the highest level, there's media outlets that came out and took some pot shots at Daniel Jones. We saw that Pat Hanlon from the New York Football Giants came out and said, what is this that's going on right now? And again, I think that that's a little bit twofold, right? One, I think ESPN from a high level, just I don't know if fully, as often is the case when you talk about covering sports at a national level versus a local level, I don't know if you have the full breadth of what has been going on. Whether or not you think Daniel Jones is not a good enough quarterback to be the franchise leader, it's totally fine. But I think oftentimes there's a bit of a gap there in terms of information and in knowledge, right? And being there day to day and knowing what's gone on. Now, on the Pat Hanlon and the Giants side of it, I think it's a reaction of one, we have been an organization that's been under scrutiny for maybe not being the best run, going back to the offseason and going back to Hard Knocks, where you had the ability to kind of control what narratives were going to be out there, and you seemingly allowed some of the dysfunction to be exposed. So, two things going on there, a lot of PR management, right? A lot of image protection there. But in the end, you move on from Daniel Jones, and that's fine. It probably should have been done sooner. It probably should have been handled better. And now we'll see. And my last note on Daniel Jones, just to be 100% clear, there is no doubt in my mind that there will be a time over the next couple of seasons where Daniel Jones is going to be playing NFL football, where he's going to be starting for a team. I'm not saying name starter coming to a season necessarily, probably going to find himself in a spot where he's backing someone up, maybe an injury, gets an opportunity to come in. And he's going to look good because Daniel Jones has shown the ability to look good for stretches in his career. Hasn't been able to do it consistently enough. Hasn't been able to do it over the course of an entire season enough to warrant being believed in beyond what the Giants gave him over his 5.5, almost 6 seasons, 5.5 seasons. But he's going to play more football. And it's evident by all of the reports that you're hearing about how many teams are interested in bringing him in. And this, by the way, probably starts to categorize Daniel Jones where he should be, right? Let's slot him where he should be, which is, man, if you're a bad team, if you're in between, you're not necessarily playoff bound, et cetera, could you play him as your starter for a couple of seasons? Probably. But as a backup quarterback, as a, hey, you need to have extra healthy bodies behind you. When you hear from Adam Schefter, the Baltimore Ravens, and I mentioned at the top, Minnesota Vikings are two of the likeliest teams to land Daniel Jones once he clears through the waivers, because no one's going to be picking up that money, as we obviously know. But Jones, as I mentioned, wants to sign with a contender, and what happens in week 12 is expected to influence his decisions. And we already know the 49ers have Allen starting this week. So depending on what Allen looks like and how concerned they are with Brock Purdy and what they're looking like pushing towards the playoffs, San Francisco would be another big option there. Originally, I thought if you're Daniel Jones, and a lot of people have been debating this, what would be the best move for you? Do you want to go to a playoff contending team? Will you be backing up someone? And if they go down, you get a chance. But there's also the world where you go to a playoff caliber team and you're just there holding the clipboard. Maybe. But by the way, remember, we talk about today, Bucks, right? You're going up against a guy like Baker Mayfield, who went through this cycle where he went to the Rams and kind of sat there for a minute. You had Sam Darnold, who went to the 49ers and didn't even really see the field at all before getting the opportunity the next season with the Minnesota Vikings. So I wonder how much where Daniel Jones goes and who he signs with will influence what the offseason looks like for him. He'll need to, I would say he would need to get on the field with a different team and showcase something where teams around the league would say, okay, New York Football Giants, they have not been great over the last handful of seasons, and we see that with a little bit more stability, or maybe just scheme, right? Maybe just the way that you want Daniel Jones to play the position on the 49ers or on the Baltimore Ravens versus how you would have him play as a New York Giant, we can see that. And now maybe we are willing to have a conversation about bringing him in potentially as the starting quarterback in camp with the opportunity to draft a young rookie and see if he can win that job. I don't know. You probably have to see him get out there on the field and put out some new tape in a new uniform over the remainder of this season. But he's going to have, looks like, a real opportunity to be on a team that is going to afford him a chance to get reps. And the other big factor here, depending on where he ends up going, when you look around the league right now, if we go by the NFL standings, you mentioned the Baltimore Ravens there. Now they're in a battle as it stands. So if you're also Daniel Jones camp, there's a world here. I didn't hear it get mentioned, although people did throw this out, but not mentioned inside of Adam Schefter necessarily. The Bills at 9-2 are a very interesting team. Not only because of the crossover of Brian Daboll, former offensive coordinator, Joe Schoen, and now they're with the Giants, and then Daniel Jones ends up going to that former organization of theirs, but they're 9-2. The Dolphins are 4-6. The Bills are one of very few teams that potentially are going to be getting to a place, even if they want to get the number 1 seed, we understand that. So you're going to be always battling with the Kansas City Chiefs. They knock them off. So it's still going to matter in that regard. You want to have home field advantage, but maybe they get to the point the division is going to be locked up. If it's not already 10 games in, they're 9-2, 4-6 Dolphins. Don't worry about the Patriots, the Jets, right? The Dolphins have been dealing with all of their injuries. Someone even threw out the Dolphins as maybe a landing spot for Daniel Jones, though I don't think it functionally makes the same type of sense. Not that it couldn't work, but it would be different than some of these other ones where you kind of look at it as 1-to-1. He is a Josh Allen light in terms of having mobility and still being able to throw the ball around a bit. Sure, he's nowhere near the running athlete that Lamar Jackson is, but okay, mobile quarterback playing out on the edge. An area, by the way, where Daniel Jones struggled this season, specifically outside the pocket, getting out in space and still being able to be accurate with the football, let alone getting that ball out quickly when required. But maybe a team like that. It's tricky because the AFC has a lot of battles in terms of seeding when it comes to that. Baltimore Ravens, they're now trailing the Pittsburgh Steelers. So you're not going to get an opportunity where down the stretch, you're getting QB rest here. That is going to be different. An interesting one enough to, like, this hasn't been thrown out at all. I'm just running through some of these teams. Cincinnati Bengals at 4-7. Joe Burrow has had the injuries, obviously. Is there a point where you get in their season, last 2 or 3 games, last couple of games where you say, okay, hey, we're going to go ahead and shut down some of our key players to avoid any late season injury risk for these guys. Maybe Daniel Jones gets a look there where they have some weapons and some opportunity to show something. Not going to be hard to squint and see a lot of different spots where he could certainly have some of those looks. People brought up the Cowboys. They're already so far out of it. Probably not worth it. That's what we've been hearing anyway. Eagles as well. Now, the Cowboys, because you have a game coming up with them, Eagles end of the season, sometimes division teams will pick up players just for the sake of, hey, what do you know about them? What can you tell us? How can you help us get that win? I don't think that either of those teams are really in that camp at this moment. Cowboys because of their record, Eagles because they're a good team right now, well run. They're winning a lot of football games. They're 8-2. Why upset the apple cart in that regard? And I don't know if Daniel Jones is that kind of guy who would want to get involved in that for the sake of spite. Now, to be clear, even with Trey Lance there in Dallas, the injury to Dak, and there's a lot going on there in the long term. Likewise, maybe for the Eagles as well. Outside of that, when we talk about NFC teams, and I don't know if Giants fans are wholly invested in where is Daniel Jones going to land, but I think it matters. Because if you cared about, we talked about it, I didn't care if Saquon Barkley went to the Eagles or went to the Pittsburgh Steelers or went to the 40. I didn't care where he was going to go play, in all honesty. Either way, I knew that I was going to watch him be successful, be competitive at a high level, and put up a ton of stats, and that's what he's doing. And it doesn't hurt me more that he's doing it for the Eagles. It does shine a light on decision-making for the Giants organization and what that means for Joe Schoen, right? That part of it matters to me. So where Daniel Jones goes and how he performs matters far more than the actual team that he goes to. Interesting ones that I could throw out there as well that haven't been talked about. I mean, it's just full landscape of the league. I mentioned Baker Mayfield. Well, why not the Rams maybe? They're 5-5. Now, they're still competing for the division, but Matthew Stafford is an absolute gamer. Is there a world where he gets hurt potentially down the stretch, where they finally fall out of the division competition? That one is so compacted together right now with the Cardinals at 6-4. It's going to be wide open and competitive. Seattle might be another team worth taking a look at. And then someone did throw out the Detroit Lions, which I thought was a really apt one in the NFC. And I mentioned the Vikings there before as well, because when you think about that team, it's super easy to look at, sometimes you got to go about backup quarterback and, can we improve that area? Well, yes, you can. If you're the Detroit Lions, sit here and say, really what we're about right now is tightening ourselves up, right? And we're still in a very competitive division with the Vikings behind us, but down the stretch here, assuming that the wins are going to keep coming, we just got to think about how can we get a little bit better, right? How can we marginally improve spots? Guess what? Hendon Hooker, who's had his injuries, came out of Tennessee. That is not the ideal backup in case Jared Goff is going to miss a game, in case Jared Goff is going to miss a series. So that's a really interesting one too, if you're Daniel Jones and you're just thinking about opportunities. And again, what happens down the stretch for the Detroit Lions and for the Minnesota Vikings and that division is going to play a big factor inside of it as well. The Detroit Lions are going to play the Colts today. They're going to play Chicago next week. They're going to play Green Bay Packers and then the Buffalo Bills. And those 3 games, Chicago, Green Bay, Buffalo, are all at home. But highly competitive games, obviously. In Chicago, let's see. New offensive coordinator Caleb Williams looked a little bit better, 70 rushing yards last week. But if we look at that and then Jordan Love, well, if you get the win today and then you get 2 division wins, all of a sudden by the time you get to that Buffalo game, maybe you're losing. Maybe it's a tough one. Maybe you're winning. Maybe you're blowing them out. Or even Green Bay or Chicago. Again, Daniel Jones. Hey man, 52-6 over the Jacksonville Jaguars. Yeah. I could see myself backing up Jared Goff in a game like that and then getting an opportunity to get in and run a couple of series of the offense. So interesting things to watch for here. And it's always a factor when you make choices about how you want your franchise to go. When you make a choice to commit at least 2 years short term to Daniel Jones, you know that at some point it may go the wrong way. And that's what's happened. Coming up here in a second, though, let's turn our attention to Tommy DeVito. What are the expectations here? And what the heck happened with the choice to go to Tommy over Drew Lock, and how does that reflect back on the coaching staff and the GM? We'll do that here on a Giants Sunday Live on YouTube coming up in just one moment. All right, Sunday football. Let's go. What do we got? 11:17 on a Sunday. If you're in the chat, feel free to jump in with your questions, with your comments, with how you're feeling about this franchise following the release of Daniel Jones, following the naming of Tommy DeVito as the starter going down, we assume, the rest of the season. Now, could he underperform and we find ourselves in a spot where Drew Lock ends up getting back under center? Potentially. But the weird part for me right now is exactly that. This isn't a knock on Tommy DeVito, right? And it's funny too, by the way, because we could sit here and say a lot of things about the stats from a year ago for Tommy DeVito, and especially the last game of the season, who they're playing against, et cetera. And Tyrod Taylor was in that mix as well. But even if, and I do feel this way, I look at Tommy DeVito and say, listen, he's a 26-year-old, player out of a smaller school, developmental, a nice story, but not necessarily a guy that you want to hang your hat on. Remember that a year ago, including coming in relief, right? And Daniel Jones played in 6 games last season, completed 67% of his passes, 900 yards, and he gave you 2 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, right? So even pre-injury a year ago, as we talked about at the time, some concerning signals were going up there about his play. So Tommy DeVito plays in 9 games. Tyrod Taylor plays in 11. And let's just compare these guys, right? Veteran quarterback, been around the league, has a ton of experience. Young QB, developmental project. They played to strikingly similar numbers, right? They were 64.4 to 64. Tyrod first, Tommy DeVito second in terms of how we talk about these stats. 1,300 to 1,100 yards. Now, Tyrod Taylor better in terms of yards per attempt, 7.4 to 6.2. Yards per game were identical. By the way, really sexy numbers here for all these quarterbacks. 122, 122, 151 for Daniel Jones. 5 touchdowns, 3 picks for Tyrod Taylor. 8 touchdowns, 3 interceptions for Tommy DeVito. Tommy DeVito sacked 37 times. So, he took a lot of hits, right? However, the rating overall ended up coming in at 89.1 for Tyrod, 89.2 for Tommy DeVito. So, at a minimum, I acknowledge that being dismissive of Tommy DeVito to the extent of, hey, this guy, he's 6'2", he's undersized, he's out of Illinois, played, I think, Syracuse before that as well. What can you really expect from him? Well, you can expect enough that Brian Daboll turned around and said, we are benching Daniel Jones. We're ultimately going to release him. And then when we turn around and we have to make a decision about it, we're actually going to go right past Drew Lock, who was paid this offseason to be the backup quarterback, named the number 2 on the depth chart the entire season, but now we're going to move past him. So what's the bigger conversation there? The bigger conversation there for me is, first of all, as we talked about when they signed Drew Lock, because Andy was a big proponent of, I don't know why we're doing this, $5 million, even if it feels small. I just don't get it. I don't get it. And Drew Lock has only once in his career thrown for more than 64% completion percentage. That was his rookie season in 2019 when he played in 5 games, completed 64%, 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns, 3 picks, right? Arguably the best that we've ever seen him was that rookie year. And by the way, from a QBR standpoint, that is the best we've ever seen him. 50.2 has never crested 50 again in his career. Last year with Seattle, there's this little kind of, spark of, oh, what could he be? And myself included, talk about overvaluing. He threw 76 passes in Seattle. 76 passes. 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 543 yards, 63% completion percentage. Okay. 44.9 QBR, 81.2 QB rating. Okay. Why did I get over? And I wasn't, talking about him being the heir apparent or something, but why did I get overexcited about him? He threw 111 passes the year prior. He missed all of 2022, by the way, didn't play at all. And in 2021, threw 111 passes. So in the last 2 years of playing football before coming to the Giants, he threw less than 200 passing attempts, something in the middle of 61, 62% completion percentage, 5 up, 5 down. And a QBR, by the way, they'd be somewhere in the 37, 38 range. So the Giants in the offseason make the choice to say, listen, Tyrod Taylor, and this is where that hard knocks, I'm telling you, maybe other GMs and other organizations said, oh, we're surprised by the way the market has gone here. Some things look a little bit different than we anticipated. But they sat there and said, okay, so here's the plan. We'll do ba-da-ba-da-da-da, and then we'll get Tyrod Taylor back at 8-9 million, call it a day, right? Everyone good? Okay, sounds so good. Now, there's everything else about trying to move up in the draft, and we understand that narrative and how it feeds into Daniel Jones. But when you sit there and you say, okay, and then we'll just bring back Tyrod, not only do you already have the problem that, Tyrod, there was everything at the end of that season suggesting, I don't know if I necessarily want to be back with the Giants organization. So did you have those conversations with him? What was that? And did you feel confident that you're going to bring him back? Then you get the Jets. They come in with this, maybe it's more than anyone else is going to give him kind of offer. Okay, fine. But again, conspiracy theory here, put on your tinfoil hats. As I've said, going back to the offseason, and I've kind of come back to it a couple of times over the course of this year. If you were worried about injuries to Daniel Jones, if you were worried that he was not the franchise guy, if you were worried about winning football games, spending a couple extra million, if it was Tyrod Taylor because you liked him and you wanted him to be the backup, doing that is the right move. Unless you're comfortable with losing football games, unless you think that this team is not quite there yet, not fully ready, which is fine, and you want to put yourself into a position to be able to lose a lot of football games, have a high draft pick, and maybe have a shot at taking a quarterback. Now, again, I even have my concerns about whether or not the fan base who is getting presumptive on taking a quarterback in next year's draft class. I would not put all of my eggs into that basket yet either. But it tells me, or at least I think, that this team didn't think they were going to be that competitive, that they didn't think they were going to win that many football games this year. And they went in selling the bad bill of goods of, hey, we improved the offensive line. I didn't pay my quarterback this much money to then go pay a running back that much money, all of those things. And again, never should have drafted a running back second overall. Doesn't matter that you shouldn't have paid him or not. But guess what? And we'll do it because we're going to have a lot of downtime down the stretch of this season. I can go back and give you 8 other versions of this past off season, and half of them include keeping Saquon Barkley and making it better for everyone involved, with or without Daniel Jones under center. And that's not to say anything about what what Tyrone Tracy Jr. has done, and absolutely loving him. So don't get me wrong. The proof is in the pudding about not overspending on a running back, and we're incredibly excited that Tyrone Tracy Jr. has looked as good as he has, and it can hopefully continue to look that good down the stretch of this season, and atone for the fumble that he had 2 weeks ago, in Germany against Carolina. Okay. But here we are in this absolute mess where Drew Lock, when asked, says, yeah, I probably have that same question as to why I'm not the starter now after Daniel Jones has been benched and ultimately released, and why it's going to Tommy DeVito. Now, you have 2 narratives. The one is, well, we want to lose football games, and Drew Lock is risky to maybe win games. Don't know if that's true. I actually think Drew Lock might be better for losing football games. So now you go back the other way. A year ago, when Tommy DeVito is starting football games for you, and you're sitting there and you're saying, Tommy DeVito, what can he really do? Well, he found a way to navigate to some victories for the Giants. He found a way to help the team move the football. And that includes, as we know, that includes a game where they didn't want him to throw the football at all, where they literally did everything they could to not have him throw the football. So credit to him, because he's gone from being a guy that a team or a coaching staff, under circumstances of injury and otherwise, did not have the confidence to say, throw a pass. Meanwhile, by the end of that year, as we go back to that season and we look at it, right? He threw 7 passes at the end of October in that game against the Jets. But he threw 20 and 27 in the next 2 games, losses. And then you get that 3-game winning streak, right? 18 of 26, 246 against Washington, a terrible defense, 3 touchdowns. I don't care how you want to slice it. It still counts, right? Goes up against New England, gets a 10-7 win, 191 yards, 151 against the Green Bay Packers, 20 of 34, the highest pass total he had. Guess what? They got beat up 24-6 against the New Orleans Saints, right? So you end up winning that last game of the year against the Eagles as well. But in the end, when you go in and look at some QBR numbers here, this is where it's a little bit wonky in terms of what Tommy DeVito is going to be and whether or not he's your best bet to lose as many games as possible, or whether there's something else at play here. And I want to get to that. But the QBRs from a year ago, 22.6, 4.3, 17.1, 33.5, 8.8, 82.3, spiked it against Green Bay, 24-22 victory, 14.8, 14.7, 35.3, 24.3 overall a year ago, 89.2 rating. So the QBR tells you, right? This guy has not been particularly good. However, one of the things, as I get so excited that I smash the mic, one of the things that Brian Daboll and that people around the team have talked about is that Tommy DeVito, as we saw last year, you want me to throw that ball quick? I'm going to throw that ball quick. You want me to make a first read decision? I'm making a first read decision. And that's one of the things that plagued Daniel Jones over the course of this year, right? And so if you're Brian Daboll, and this is where hey, fans, prepare yourselves, right? Most of these games are probably going to come, every game after you lose against Carolina, you don't sit here and go, well, the Giants could certainly win some games down the stretch. They've been a bad football team, even if Daniel Jones was a large contributor of that. And when you look down the rest of this season, Tampa Bay, now Dallas is an interesting one. Saints now with their interim head coach would look better. Then Baltimore, Atlanta, you have Indianapolis, and you have Philadelphia, right? Again, when you're a 2-8 football team, it's hard to say, well, where are some of the wins going to come here? But you can win some of those games. 2 or 3 of those games, you're probably going to be in down the stretch here. And I am very curious about how Brian Daboll looks at it. And if he says, I'm about to show you why Daniel Jones was a mistake, because I've been working and building up Tommy DeVito. There's a little bit of coach bravado, a little bit of Bill Belichick kind of inside of him of, not Drew Lock, the guy that's been around the league and has some experience that we paid this offseason. I'm going to my project, to my pet project, and I'm going to show you that he can play well. Win or lose, I'm going to show you that the QB position could have been better all year. Issue with that is you're talking about maybe a little bit of shots fired at your own GM, who you came in with tandem with, because, as we saw in Hard Knocks, you're sitting there, you're having a conversation. We'll do this, we'll do that. Everybody on board. You can see maybe Daboll's not totally on board, doesn't really love it. And when things are going bad for a team, self-preservation does come into effect at some point. And I think that there can be a little bit of that going on here between Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen, even if they are objectively buddies and very close and they want to be successful together. At some point, Brian Daboll is saying, well, okay, we're buddies. We came in on the same ticket. But guess what? If this team goes 3-13, out of the 2, it would be more likely, in my opinion, that Brian Daboll is the guy that gets removed from the equation rather than Joe Schoen. And that's not me saying that I think Joe Schoen has been great or that he's done everything right. He hasn't. We all know that. But this rookie class this season has played pretty darn well across the board. So, okay, we have some pieces. We've had some real hits here, right? We like Drew Phillips. We love Tyrone Tracy Jr. Theo Johnson is starting to come on, right? So as all the pieces start to play well, but the team isn't playing well, you can move that coach out and still keep the GM in place, because the GM still keeps the vision going forward, right? So now if you're John Mara and you're making that decision, you're saying, in my mind, hey, if I had to let go of the head coach, that would be rough, but I would keep the GM and the vision intact. If I have to let go of the GM, then I'm probably by default letting go of the head coach as well, because I've gone through the clunky overlapping of GM and head coach versus clean slate, new GM, brings in his coach, brings in their players, right? And you start from ground up again. And that's the difference to me here about which way the Giants organization could potentially go. Getting a couple of comments here just real quick, since we're hanging out on a Sunday. The mess starts at the top from Ronnie. Listen, this has been a big part of it as well. We'll talk a little bit more about Tommy DeVito here. I mean, we understand they're 2-8, so we'll see the game and we'll see how he plays. And I hope that he plays well and that we see a level of improvement relative to where he was a year ago. Not, oh, well, he was a third string quarterback and now he's a starter. No, but just, hey, can he be a serviceable backup for you? If you decide after this season, I mean, clearly Drew Lock's not going to be back in a part of this organization. So what do you feel like going into next year? Not that Tommy DeVito is necessarily a bridge quarterback, although he could prove something over the back of the season, but more that how do you feel about that QB room? And how do you feel about saying, hey, Tommy, you can be here and be a part of this and be a key QB figure that helps coach up our rookie quarterback, that maybe helps when we bring in a veteran QB to be the bridge guy, helps him understand what we're doing here, that we can trust and rely on in a pinch if we have someone go down. The mess starting at the top point from Ronnie, which I don't disagree with. Like, it's been a bad run organization. We said this time and again, though, and there's a really good example of this around the Saquon Barkley process. Because I've heard people say, well, John Mara, you keep getting involved at these key moments. Like, the decision-making around Eli Manning and drafting a quarterback with Dave Gettleman. But it's one or the other. You can't allow a GM to draft a running back second overall, but you did. So you allowed him to make that choice. Then people suggest that he inserted himself and said, you need to keep Daniel Jones. Okay, so you inserted yourself and said, you got to bring Daniel Jones back. So Joe Schoen ends up signing him to a contract rather than franchise tagging him, maybe looking at Saquon Barkley in that situation. Then you follow it up this past offseason where, again, John Mara is getting too involved, but he didn't force Joe Schoen to keep Saquon Barkley in fear that he would go to the Eagles and he would lose sleep over that, right? My opinion is that John Mara and ownership are incredibly passionate. They love the organization, right? They love the fan base. They want the team to do well. And at times, they have been more emotionally based than analytical or, just hands off. And it's interesting because John Mara, when he comes out and gives a vote of confidence a few weeks ago, which won't mean anything by the end of the year if it goes off the rails. But when he says, I want to see the vision out, this is the hard part for me because it's as much about wanting to be committed to the vision, having Joe Schoen come in as the GM and say, I'm going to go get Brian Daboll. This is how we're going to do it. And I again believe that behind closed doors, Joe Schoen told John Mara, we are a handful of years away from stripping this thing down, rebuilding it up through the draft, through free agency, going through that process and getting back to a place where we're being year over year competitive. Yes, the playoff season aside, that first year and maybe getting a little bit swept up, but in the background, every offseason, you heard Joe Schoen say, still a lot of holes to fill, still a lot of work to do. So I don't think it was this cut and dry thing. The problem now is because of how much quick turnover the franchise has had, especially at the head coaching position, right? Hasn't been as bad at the GM spot, but you've rolled through all these head coaches and you feel like at the end of the Dave Gettleman era, well, we mismanaged the Eli Manning situation a little bit. And I felt bad about that. And I wanted to make that right. Then I go into my new GM and then we had rolled through all these coaches already too. And I want this to work. So I want to stay committed to it. But I'm being influenced by the past, right? And unlike life in general, where you should have experiences inform future decisions, because in the NFL, because in sports, when you change over a GM and you change over a head coach, it's a new vision and a new process. You should not allow the failings of Dave Gettleman to influence whether or not you think Joe Schoen has done things perfectly over these first few seasons, whether or not you trust the vision as far forward as you want it to go. Because back then, you were trying to go to a familiar voice and a familiar face with all this experience around the NFL and say, hey, save this franchise and save the end of Eli Manning's career. So the best way that I can frame this when it comes to John Mara and ownership, when it comes to Joe Schoen and the GM, front office, when it goes down to the head coaching and the coaching staff overall. Because, by the way, Bobby Johnson went to Washington, and that offensive line is playing really well. That coach that everyone wanted to scapegoat and say he was the absolute 100% problem. If you can't clearly identify the one pure issue that an organization has, it has many issues. And that's what I think the Giants have right now. It doesn't mean that I don't think that Brian Daboll can be the head coach long-term or that Joe Schoen can stay at GM. But it just means that there is a lot going on in this process, and it has not always been done the right way, far from it oftentimes. And the Daniel Jones situation, to me, again, regardless of his player performance on the field, is another example how they sometimes find themselves chasing their tail. Greeny Green. Yes, fire Shane. Can't trust him making decisions going forward. So again, just at a very high level, before we tie a bow on this one, heading into Sunday action, Giants play at 1 o'clock. Tommy DeVito will be under center. Drew Lock will be the backup, and we will see. And I'm going to get to the biggest thing to watch for Tommy being under center for the Giants. It's true. If you go back and look at the Giants draft picks, it's easy to ask questions of Joe Schoen and that process. And by the way, the irony about it in this season, where you have Malik Neighbors, we agree he's a hit, right? We like Tyler Newman. Now, again, separate conversation to have about other decisions that could have been made in the offseason relative. Last week, a week and a half ago, I brought up Julian Love as like this prime example of a guy that didn't cost a lot of money. It's regime changes and all that other stuff, but just thinking about it from a high level and saying, where could you have allocated funds? What were the results that you got from that? And how could it have looked different from where you spend money? And that's not just about Joe Schoen. That's just an NFL high level, thought process to have around player value, even if they're not all pros, even if they're not going to be the marquee names for your franchise. Tyler Newman we like Drew Phillips. We like Theo Johnson. We love Tyrone Tracy Jr. Even Darius Musa was taken in the 6th round. Like, we like him. He's been playing. He's been, he's contributed. Okay. The interesting wrinkle to that is a year ago, you would have said, we like where Deonte Banks is. Let's keep developing him in year number 2. It's been a big regression for him this season, right? John Michael Schmitz, okay, pretty good. Jalen Hyatt, massive question mark. Let's see what happens for him in the second half of the season. Eric Gray, Trey Hawkins, Jordan Riley, Javarius Owens, right? None of them. And now 7th round picks, you don't include those. But that first year, that big draft class, okay, Kayvon Thibodeau, big time contributor. But Andy's brought this up now, even going back to the start of the season where he said, good player. Is he a great player? Is he, give him the big money player like you did when you went out and got Brian Burns via trade and signed him to that contract? Evan Neal, obviously a massive miss to this point. We'll see how his reps play out over the rest of the season. Big question marks about his footwork playing tackle spot. Wan'Dale Robinson, okay. Zudu, again, 3rd round pick. Like, you wanted to go get this guy, and he at a minimum, you've had him in there for some reps, but you haven't seen him playing consistently. Cordell Flott, mixed bag. Daniel Bellinger off the radar completely now. Dane Belton, Micah McFadden, big player for you. Davidson, McCathan, Darian Beavers, right? So you go through these draft classes, and understandably, you say, I got some guys that I really like right now, but will they develop and be there a year from now? That's the big question. And I do think that you will get the proof in the pudding here on a handful of key players, right? Down the stretch of this season specifically. Really watch Cordell Flott a lot. Not whether or not he gets beat on reps, but overall, is he putting some solid film on tape? Jalen Hyatt, is he going to get reps? Because if he's not, that's a real problem in a 3rd round pick. Same thing with Deonte Banks. You're a 1st round defensive back. You got to find your way to round into form here. And I got to go back and check the tape because I didn't. Once a player gets drafted by the Giants, I get excited about them. I want them to do well. I got to remember whether or not, when I was leading up to that draft, whether I was excited about Deonte Banks or whether or not I had concerns about him. It's not to give myself a pat on the back. It'll be honest one way or the other. But I couldn't remember if it was, if I can get Deonte Banks, I'm very excited, or, Deonte Banks would be the player to have a concern if the Giants take him, and the development and some of the things I didn't think I loved about him versus other available players at the time. So all these things are massive factors. And I think that when you are a first-time GM the pitfalls and the growing pains are going to be there. And that is what Joe Schoen was when he took this job, right? Now, he'd been around the league a ton, had a lot of familiarity, had a lot of experience, good track record in Buffalo, been a part of a lot of good organizations. But you still need your own growth in terms of you're making the decisions. You have to make those tough choices. And if the high-level narrative is we believe that we were further away than closer, we secretly knew we weren't going to win a lot of games this year, we knew we were going to move on from Daniel Jones, and we're continuing to try to build this thing up, then I would rewind it back and say, I have real questions about why you went and traded for Brian Burns. Not because of the talent as an individual, but because between the assets and the money, why pay that particular player? Any organization needs good cornerstone pieces. You need your Dexter Lawrences. You need your Andrew Thomases, right? Like, you need a number one wide receiver. We get that. You need a solid offensive line. But did I need to go to trade for Brian Burns? Carolina Panthers wanted to trade him. Why? Because they knew they were going to be bad. And we want to get as much as we can possibly get out of it, right? And if you're the Giants, what needs to happen over the next season and a half to justify having gone and made that deal this offseason, right? That's, I think, going to be the question, because that's a lot of money. $30 million cap hit, I think, next year. That's a lot of dollars. Now, we'll see what happens when it comes to Kayvon Thibodeau and whether or not he gets that next big contract. And by the way, if he doesn't, bad reflection back on Joe Schoen, right? Because then 2 of your top 10 picks you took in the same draft class, both will become misses by all accounts, productive or not. If you don't give second contracts to your first round picks, those are misses. Those are stains on your GM resume. So it'll be interesting to see. But that's all what's going to unfold over the course of the season, specifically to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, specifically to this game coming up here on Sunday. Listen, let's see. Whether or not over the remainder of this year the Giants want to lose a lot of football games, I think this one matters for Brian Daboll. This one matters for Brian Daboll to come out and to show, remember, that a team that has scored 18, 22, 17 in overtime in Germany against the Carolina Panthers, right? A team that has only scored 20-plus points 1, 2, 3 times this year. Show me that Daniel Jones, with the injury and the development and everything else, that he was a big component. And we believe that he obviously played a massive role in it, but show that the offense was stymied specifically because of where he was regressing. Not being able to throw the ball on the move a little bit, not being able to make quick read and react decisions, right? Tommy DeVito, you want to watch something for him? How quickly he gets the ball out, obviously. How mobile he is, how much they choose to use his legs in this game and over the rest of the season. And then also the deep balls, right? Because that's the biggest issue here is that Tommy DeVito does not have a big arm. So utilizing Darius Slayton, utilizing Jalen Hyatt, utilizing your number one weapon in Malik Neighbors is going to be difficult on a deep route running scenario. And I think from a game script standpoint, what makes that then tricky is you're going to be talking about trying to be productive in yak, right? Trying to be productive after the catch. And that can work in certain instances, right? But it's a little bit of a double-edged sword when you want to get out the ball quickly, you want to make those read and react plays, but you also have to realize that if you're going to rely and depend on Tyrone Tracy Jr. and consistent running game too, well, as you start to creep down, right, one of the things you may not be able to take advantage of is the defense starting to pressure that line of scrimmage and then getting single coverage over the top and wanting to take those looks. Now, let me be clear. Just because I'm saying that Tommy DeVito doesn't have a big arm, it doesn't mean he can't throw the ball down the field. What it does mean is, because I think Daboll will want him to try to take the shot. His long last year was 41 yards, by the way. I think a big part of it is going to be up to the wide receivers, right? Up to Malik Neighbors. Hey, Tommy DeVito dropped back. They put the extra man in the box. The safety's pinching down. and he just launched it. And I don't mean launched it to any particular place on the field. I mean, he just threw the thing out there with everything he had behind it and put a lot underneath it so that Malik Neighbors could get downfield, high point that ball, and just try to make a play. And if it's in single coverage, I'm going to take that bet. I'm going to bet that in single one-on-one coverage, Malik Neighbors at worst is going to come down from that saying, damn, if you had just led me another 3 yards, we get a touchdown, whatever it may be, right? Maybe a little frustration on his part. But I'm not going to be overly worried about single coverage interception risk here for Tommy DeVito, because I trust at least that if you just launch that thing as far as hard as you can, worst case is it's going to be by the way, worst case it's intercepted, who cares? But I think that those moments are going to come here where if you want to take advantage of it, it's going to be because Tampa Bay says, hey, okay, Tommy DeVito, prove it. Right? Prove it if we really start to bunch things up. If we play a lot of zone underneath looks here, where running those slant routes, running those quick plays, running those bubble screens, which the Giants historically have always had such a hard time running trick plays. You want to try to run those? Guess what? Malik Neighbors going to get blown up 7 yards behind the line of scrimmage, right? So you need to find a way to script your way to success. And I find it fascinating to see how Brian Daboll goes about his play calling to say, I need to prove here that Daniel Jones' regression is really what started to break down our ability to be a successful offensive team game over game. Side Guy Bry, frequent flyer. How are you, sir? He throws to the outside well. Last year, the Saints, Eagles forced him to throw across the middle, and things went south. Can Tommy throw over the middle now? We'll see. Yes. And by the way, really, you bring up a good point, Bry, is that, like, I'm saying, Tommy DeVito, does he have a big enough arm to get the ball downfield? Well, we'll find out, right? Throwing to the outside, 10-yard out routes, right? Okay, fine. But again, and over the middle as well. So maybe a difference from last year to this year, obviously, is going to be that you have Malik Neighbors. So that's different, right? Where the assignments are, who's covering who is going to be different. The congestion in the middle of the field, though, may be the same. Linebackers, again, underneath zone looks. What is that going to look like? Are they going to go with single high safety because they're not as worried about the deep threat and keep another player down in towards the box, providing some of that support for those underneath passes? That's going to be the interesting thing. One of the, you mentioned about outside throws, is you can still have success when we talk about deep throws or pushing the ball downfield, 20 plus yards. That's what comes to mind. But if you have the ability, if Tommy DeVito can throw a good outside ball from 15 to 25 yards, a really nice ball, great. Excuse me. Scheme those plays for those opportunities. Now, if it's going to be a tightly contested catch and bumped out of bounds and it's 17 yards, okay. If it's going to be maybe something where if you get the right release off the line, an area where some of the Giants receivers struggle, then, hey, if you get that good release, well, now it's a go ball, right? So now effectively what took 15 to 20 air yards is a 45 to 60 yard play. So that's where, again, the yak to me is the most important. And even though we talk about over the middle plays, I'll be very curious to see how Brian Daboll approaches that. Because I think a lot of this is going to be about how do we maximize Tommy DeVito's value while mitigating Tommy DeVito's risk? So you'll know early. Talk about throwing over the middle. And I assume that Tommy has developed, right, beyond where he's been. But this to me is going to be, how much have you developed? Can we trust you to throw it over the middle? If in the first 2 series you don't see him throwing those balls over the middle, then that tells you the story a little bit, right? And it can change, ebb and flow over the course of the game. But you got to see it. You got to show it to me. And you have to show me that you can be effective. So again, whatever this is going to be for the rest of the season, we'll find out. Where the Giants are going to draft, we'll find out. But I want to see how Brian Daboll approaches this game with Tommy DeVito, because whether or not people agree, I think there is a little bit of a fracture here between, by the way, ownership, GM, and head coach, right? I think it goes all the way down the list here. And message sending is going to be happening down the stretch of this season, in my opinion. And when push comes to shove and jobs are on the line, you start to have a little bit of a different narrative building here. So I'm very curious to watch Tommy DeVito. I have nothing against him being successful. I am very disappointed that he was doing this celebration last year, said he was going to stop doing it, but apparently he's going to be bringing it back. At a certain point, you want to be a respected NFL quarterback, come on. Like, just, just make the touchdowns, have your celebrations. But hey, if it's his thing, it's his thing. And guess what? If I get a couple of these today because Tommy DeVito is throwing touchdowns, running for touchdowns, I'll take it and I'll be excited about it. So this is just the beginning of a new season in a lot of ways for the Giants, and how they approach this agenda of getting to the bottom of the draft, or how they approach understanding what they have or don't have, is going to be fascinating, because you can say whatever you want. There's been injuries and other things here. And again, I've said this in the past, I said it today. John Mara was the problem. Dave Gettleman was the problem. Eli Manning at the end of his career isn't the same player anymore. You shouldn't have drafted this guy. You shouldn't have paid that guy, this player, that coach, coordinator, all this stuff. It's always, always, always easy to heap the blame onto the singular person rather than to look at the whole picture. Daniel Jones, not a good enough quarterback to be the franchise guy in New York. No one's disagreeing. But don't sell me the bill of goods that Daniel Jones was the only problem here. And Brian Daboll knows he needs to prove that more than anything else, it was Daniel Jones, that I can do it. Because remember, this is the guy that was brought in and known as a QB whisperer. And more than anything, I think the injuries to Daniel Jones maybe derailed the ability to accomplish some things with him that they wanted to. And I think that it really broke Daniel Jones from a mental makeup standpoint. And he may have never had it. Somebody, by the way, posted up a video of Daniel Jones, like high school highlights, pre-Duke. Good Lord. Night and day what that quarterback looks like. I'm talking about deep ball accuracy, the thing that he lost, right? So interesting to see. Last one here from Ronnie, who Ronnie may be agreeing with Side Guy Bry. He also could be agreeing with everything I said. So I'm going to assume that you're agreeing with me. Thanks, Ronnie. That's what I like to see. Also, Greeny, it's way more fun when Tommy's doing that celebration. Yeah, listen, like I said, because it means the team is doing well, right? Then the celebration is always fun. I'll be very interested to see how it goes. And Malik Neighbors did talk about, some people said, oh, it's like, a shot at Daniel Jones, or Brian Daboll taking a shot at Daniel Jones, where he was saying, Malik, get ready to have your head around. You're supposed to be there. Tommy's going to release that ball before your head is turned around, right? And that, again, just speaks to when you are a quarterback who is trying to develop and trying to hit his mark, and you have your head coach, Brian Daboll, saying, this is what I want. This is a timing system. I need you to be on point. Tommy DeVito goes, listen, man, I may not be able to throw the ball the hardest or the deepest or the fastest. I may not have extra to be the tallest, all those things. But if my head coach says this is the route and that's when I throw it, if I do that, my coach is going to come back, catch, no catch, touchdown, whatever it is, and say, you're doing the right thing. Is it all going according to plan? Maybe, maybe not, but you're doing what I'm asking of you. And as a journeyman potential quarterback, as a quarterback that wants to continue to extend his career in the NFL, that's your first best step. Your best foot forward is when your coach tells you what he wants you to do, figure out a way to, as highly as possible, as often as possible, execute that game plan. People talked about Daniel Jones, the flea flicker, and not sending it when you had Wan'Dale Robinson and Malik Neighbors wide open. That was the final straw. Because for whatever number of factors, Daniel Jones had just become too risk adverse, which, again, after you got the big contract, you wouldn't think that would be the case, but he just couldn't. He could no longer throw with anticipation. And that was always a struggle, but you saw it develop progressively over his career, and then it totally fell off. And once you need to see it before you throw it, you're dusted. Because that means defenses are seeing you throw it. And that also means that the opportunity, that window went from being wide open to being almost fully shut. It's microseconds in the NFL, and Daniel Jones could not do that. Last one here, we got from Diaz. The Giants franchise has been a joke since Manning was QB. Yeah, you got it. you nailed it, right? And guess what? People talk about this too. You got so lucky over that run of Eli Manning, whether or not the perfect quarterback, right? Whether or not he's going to be the best ever. No. But just knowing that the quarterback is going to go out there and play, right? And 6 years, 5.5 years of Daniel Jones, you never had that. You never had the, well, at least we know Daniel Jones wasn't going to go out there from injury and then also production and play, right? But you see how fraught it is to be in the NFL and to live in this landscape and say, when you don't know what you have under center, it's a dark future. It is a dark looking process. And as we got a little bit of noise in the background here, my apologies. And that's something that the fan base is now living through. And I'm 38. So by and large, that experience, Danny, going back to Kerry Collins, okay, but we went to Super Bowl with him, right? Had a long stretch of some nice play and some decent opportunities and going to playoff games, right? Like, it's been a long time since the Giants felt very uncomfortable at the QB position. Even that extension of that, and then into Kurt Warner when you bring him briefly before Eli Manning takes over, right? But so I can sit here and go, hey, man, for 20 years, not even as, all pro, Kerry Collins, whatever, but for a 20-year stretch, you didn't have questions at the quarterback spot. You knew who was going to play. You knew it was going to be pretty good. And in Eli Manning's case, you knew that you're going to have a chance to win championships. And since Eli left, only been one quarterback and a couple of backups, but you're starting to get that sense, right, of what it is to be without that franchise guy. And why, by the way, everyone is, you get that pick, you get to the draft, you take your quarterback. We've talked about this philosophically on the show before. Take a quarterback. You need a quarterback, yes. But you don't have to take a quarterback. You got to take the right quarterback. And Carolina Panthers could tell you about taking the wrong quarterback. Houston can tell you about taking the right quarterback, right? And draft classes are built differently. So that's the way that it's been going for the New York Football Giants. We'll see how things go today against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. More important about things beyond the game than maybe the game itself. And we'll go ahead and fire off a couple here real quick before we get out the door. A lot of back and forth here with Juan and with Ronnie in a good way. Great to see the conversation. We absolutely love it. And again, mea culpa for not being around this past week and being able to talk about these things in real time, starting on Monday, starting tomorrow, right back at it. Going to try to be dialing this thing back up because while the season may not matter as much, now everything else matters a whole heck of a lot. And that includes watching other impending free agents. It means looking at the rookie class and how they're playing, evaluating who's a part of this roster going forward or not, evaluating Brian Daboll and the coaching staff, evaluating GM Joe Schoen and what that looks like for this team going forward. I will, because I know this conversation's happening here. This is what gave me the chuckle. Only because all caps. All caps means you're in it. Means you're invested in the conversation. The Maras will never sell the team. You have to come to grips with that. And it is true. They're never going to sell the team. And even though Juan is saying then we are in trouble if they don't. I disagree in that vein. I'll close out on this because the two teams that share the stadium, the other owner is a real problem. Because you have one owner and maybe two owners who both want their teams to succeed, right? But you have one owner who emotionally lives and dies by this team in John Mara and who has made mistakes, no doubt about it, but has never gone, in my opinion, as far as what Woody Johnson has been reported to have done. To legitimately walk into the rooms and communicate what he wants the team to do on the field. Decisions that maybe he is going to tell the GM he needs to make. Whether or not John Mara has always hired the right people or always said the right things in his press conferences and discussions. Totally agree. He's had plenty of those missteps. But I do believe, even if he's made mistakes in who he's hired, that when he makes the hires, he does allow them to try to execute. The problem has been he's been making mistakes at who to hire, right? So I look at it very differently in terms of those two owners. And no one was making that comparison, but I'm putting it out there as there is the meddling owner, and then there is the sometimes overly emotional owner. And I think Mara wants this team to succeed like you wouldn't believe. And I think that he also wants to be loyal to players and loyal to coaches and loyal to GMs. And that comes with its own pitfalls. But I'll take a little bit of too much loyalty and some missteps in totality over what I've seen in the New York Jets organization, where it's not about missteps or mistakes in who you hire. It's about you are the one that makes the decisions, right? The Jerry Jones of the world. Those are the kind of owners that I don't want to be a part of my franchise. So we'll go ahead and leave it there, my friends. Full hour. Come on. Bang. We come back in a fury. We take some time off. We get depressed about the state of things. When we come back in, we go full force on a Sunday morning, guys. Listen, I really appreciate everybody in here, from Greeny and Juan and Ronnie and, of course, Cy Guy Bry. Thank you for being a part of the conversation. We want more of this, and we want to do more of this when we do the lives. If you're talking and you got questions and conversations, let's have them. Right? Let's have those conversations and let's chop it up a little bit, because I think we're going to be having a lot of these broad conversations around this team over the last 7 games of the season. 7 games, yes. 7 games of the season before we get to the off season, which, guess what? Will be starting very, very soon for the New York Football Giants. They'll be one of the first teams doing the off season work. Questions about GM, questions about head coach, questions about personnel. We watch it with an eye. We turn the game on at 1 o'clock. We hope for the best, right? I've never been a guy that can root for losses. I'm not going to be mad if they lose. But if Tommy DeVito starts giving the sign, if he starts slinging a couple to Malik Neighbors to get him some of those rookie numbers, Tyrone Tracy Jr. is running that rock. Yeah. I'm going to sit back and enjoy a New York Football Giants Sunday. We're back again tomorrow. We'll talk about the game against the Bucs, talk about the results, and talk specifically about player performance, because that's what matters now more than ever. Evaluation of who they have on this roster and who can carry forward. Be a part of it here on YouTube, also on your podcast feeds. One Giant Podcast. Get me over on X at Adam Armbrecht, breaking things down, giving you some commentary and takeaway. Until next time, though, if Andrew Mack was here, he would want, need, and demand you, the people, know. As always, let's go Big Blue.